Televidentes de Canal Institucional, muy buenas tardes nuevamente en la ciudad de Cartagena.
Good afternoon to the viewers of the Institutional Channel and the development of the 6th Regional Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction in the Americas. It has been a pleasure to join you in the work that's being done here in the city of Cartagena, in the encounter and the experiences from the specialists and everyone, but especially in Latin America, the people who've been present here to share these experiences. We will now talk about the importance of prevention, which is the topic of investment and infrastructure. Yes, good afternoon, everyone. All of our viewers following us through the institutional channel. And like we said, yes, infrastructure and investment, resilient infrastructure and investment. This is plenary number 3. Remember that we have 4 plenaries within the framework of the 6th regional platform. This is number 3. And we are going to talk about the importance of investment in the infrastructure for the reduction of disaster risks, and also the topic of financial and insurance and its importance within all the risk management structures, not only for Colombia, but for the entire region. In the auditorium Getsemani, we have Samuel Lancheros to start this plenary session number 3 within the framework of the 6th Regional Platform for Risk Reduction in the Americas. Thank you. Yes, Carolina. We now continue from Getsemani Auditorium in the Convention Center in Cartagena to start off with the 3rd central plenary session of the 6th Regional Platform for Risk Reduction, Disaster Risk Reduction in the Americas. So we have the plenary called Investment and Resilient Infrastructure, Best Practices and Application in the Region, where basically we acknowledge the main progress made and challenges and recommendations in terms of disaster risk reduction, investment, and financial protection strategies to have a resilient structure and guarantee continuity of the essential services. In this plenary, we have Dr. Gina Watson, the representative of the Pan-American Organization of Health and the World Health Organization. And as panel members, we also have engineer Magda Constanza Buitrago. She is an advisor for infrastructure to the Ministry of Transportation of Colombia. Engineer Tony Gibbs, Dr. Carlos Valdez, General Director of the National Center for Disaster Prevention in Mexico, and also Alexandra Ocliz from the Ministry of Risk Management in Ecuador. So to hand over to Dr. Gina Watson, she will be our moderator. As I mentioned previously, she represents the Pan-American Health Organization and the World Health Organization in Colombia. She's a citizen of Nicaragua. She's a surgeon, a physician with master's degree in public health from the Autonomous University of Nicaragua and instrumental human sciences and social sciences by the University of León in Spain. For 15 years, she was a public official for the Ministry of Health of Nicaragua, where she held several positions of responsibility and has worked for 27 years in the Pan-American Health Organization as an advisor to Health Services of Panama, advisor in terms of promotion of health in Trinidad and Tobago. In September 2006, Dr. Watson took position of the Caribbean Western Coordination in Barbados, Eastern Coordination in Barbados, where she worked as a representative. Between 2010 and 2013, she represented OPS or WHO in Honduras before taking on her current role in Colombia. Without further ado, and before starting, we want to tell you also that in this auditorium we have Wi-Fi connectivity for those of you who would like to through the network Plataforma Reducción Riesgo 2018, and the password is Cartagena 2018, so you can be connected as well. So, without further ado, I hand over to Dr. Gina Watson to moderate this panel. Thank you. Thank you, Master of Ceremonies, and thanks to all the audience. It is a pleasure to be here and welcome you all to by the Pan American Health Organization on behalf of our director, Dr. Cari Cetin, and on behalf of the Ministry of Transportation of Colombia, INVIAS, who is a co-moderator for this session. We have a panel of distinguished members. I'd like to introduce them now. To my left, and in that sequence, we have Alejandra Ocles Padilla. She's a Minister of Risk Management, and she was appointed by the President, the Constitutional President, 2017, Erwin Moreno. She's Afro-descendant, an activist against racism and discrimination, as well as for black women's rights in Ecuador and Latin America. So that's an interest we share. She's also performed in the International Assembly, Ministry of the People, Citizens Participation, chairwoman of the transition of the Women's Council, and gender equality, among others. She is a professional in educational sciences and graduated from the Social Sciences School of Flapson, and she leads the National Decentralized System of Risk Management. Following, we have Dr. Carlos Valdez. He is the General Director of the National Center for Disaster Prevention in Mexico. He was born in the city of Mexico, and he's a geophysicist engineer with the National University of Mexico. He studied a doctorate degree in geophysics in Madison, Wisconsin, USA. He's given courses in the postgraduate area of the engineering faculty of UNAM and conferences nationwide and internationally. He's an author of a number of scientific books, reports, and also a science educator. During his professional career, he has also been involved in important positions with research and geological services of the United States. He was a researcher in the research investigator of IBM in Palo Alto, California, a member of the Technical Advisory Committee of the Pico de Orizaba volcano and Popocatépetl, and head of seismic services, National Seismic Services. And following, we have Engineer Tony Gibbs. He is a civil engineer and expert in structures and practices in the Caribbean and other places. He conducted his graduate studies in Queen's University, and his engineering career has included actions with Norman Darban and partners in London and Caribbean, and a construction company in Jamaica. He's a consultant of Consultant Engineers Partnership with 4 active offices in the Eastern Caribbean. His dedication is focused on concrete and pretense concrete, and also different types of structures, collaborative design, and multidisciplinary teams, and design against natural threats like hurricanes and earthquakes. And he's interested in the interrelationship between assurance engineering, and he's dedicated a lot of his time participating in specific problems relative to structural design of hospitals in areas subject to hurricanes and earthquakes. He has received several accolades and awards for his work and contribution to disaster risk reduction. In 2007, in 2010, he was appointed as an icon in the Caribbean in science and technology and innovation by the National Higher Education Institute for Research and Technology in Trinidad and Tobago. And in 2015, Tony Gibbs became the first person in the Caribbean to be elected a member of the Royal Academy of Engineering. To his left, we have engineer Magda Constanza Huitrago Rios. She's a civil engineer from St. Thomas's University in Colombia, specializing in civil works administration. She performs as an advisor to the Vice Minister of Infrastructure and Transportation in Colombia, and she's a consultant of CEPAL. She has over 20 years' experience in the transportation sector, especially the supervision of road projects, the formulation and assessment of public investment projects, structuring of international loans, programming or scheduling, and budget execution, strategic planning, results management, risk management, adaptation to climate change. Welcome all. It is a privilege to have you all here. And different from other sessions today, we're not going to ask you to turn off your phones and hide them under the table to use them, but rather pull them out and put them on your tables or next to your hand, and we will explain why. Alex.
Bien, buenas tardes con todos.
Good afternoon. As the doctor was saying, we want to create an interactive space for you all now. We want you all to give relevance to the most important points. As she mentioned, please pull out your phones and go to your browser and look for www.slido.com, S-L-I-D-O. We need your active participation right now. Then we'll see the results from Argentina. In fact, we're going to talk about this later on. And please go into code PR18. Once you are there, we are going to run a little trial of the system. The system is developed for you to vote on the questions that you consider have the most relevance, not just to your own interest, but the topic at hand, but also that you can formulate the questions that you would wish to ask to your panel members. When we have this mechanism, it allows us to be permanent players in the discussion. So if you're there, you've entered, please let's run a survey with a specific question. Please move on. So since we're in the World Cup fever now, you're going to help us see what is the presence that we have in the auditorium. What country will win the World Cup 2018? Perhaps we don't have too many people from Argentina because they're watching the game now. But we see a good presence of Colombians. 39 people right now are connected. So 52 people. That's the activity, the way it works. You're going to see on your mobile phones, you can see on the top part there are two segments. Vote, which is what you're doing right now. And to your left, questions. And then we're going to ask, or the doctor is going to ask, to be able to vote on questions that have been pre-selected and that you have the possibility to ask any question that you may consider relevant. You will be the main players of this activity. Good luck. Thank you, Alex. And the people who are joining us via mainstream internet can vote and formulate questions according to what's been shared at this time. So, without any further comments, I'm going to ask Engineer Buitrago Rios to give her presentation on the topic of advancing towards a resilient road structure and an experience in Colombia. Engineer. Good afternoon, everyone. And a special greeting for my panel member colleagues and the audience and all the participants in this regional platform. For the Ministry of Transportation and the transportation sector in Colombia, it is fundamental and I believe of utmost importance to let you know what the transportation sector has done to have a resilient road infrastructure. This has been a task that's not only led by the sector, but also it's an intersectoral work that has demanded synergy between all the knowledge-generating entities and those who work on the roads. And what encouraged us to work on this? You remember, as the chairman said yesterday, or the president said yesterday, in 2010, 2011, our roads were notoriously affected by intense rain and the frequency. Over 1,600 kilometers of roads were affected. Over 90 bridges collapsed. The damages surpassed $1 billion. And the reconstruction or recovery, not reconstruction, was $2 million. So this affected our GDP by 2% in 2010. From that point on, we began to work intersectorally. That's the key. The sector by itself did not understand what it meant to adapt to climate change and what it meant to manage risk. We didn't know that. So we began to work hand in hand with the National Planning Department, which is the organization that sets the national policy, with the Ministry of the Environment, who started to teach us what it was that was going to pay for those climate events in the future. And we worked hand in hand with the Risk Management Unit and the international organizations that have been fundamental to us. So through this, we began to build plans or roadmaps on how to adapt, how to work to have this resilient infrastructure. And in first instance, we managed to work with CDKN. CDKN supported us in building the climate change adaptation plan for our road infrastructure, which is a roadmap that has the strategic actions to begin to adapt. On the other hand, in parallel, the Inter-American Development Bank began to work with us on a strengthening plan to involve disaster risk management. All of this as teamwork. It wasn't that just a consultant would sit down and do it with us, but we all worked, and that's the key, and that's what the message is for everyone. In that interdisciplinary work, we also had the government sector, but also the local sectors and the private sector through contractors. And we began to work on some mainstreams. If you can see, we worked on those streams, which are almost similar. And that helped us to understand that we were going hand in hand in risk reduction and adaptation to climate change. And then we started on our way. That path traced as the first action to know where is the higher or lower risk. And then we designed our vulnerability map in the road network. Over 17,500 kilometers where we identified which are at higher or lower risk. We have the red ones, the blue ones, the orange ones, and understanding that over 5,800 kilometers are under high and very high risk. And 45% are in the institution that handles our non-assigned roads. So we don't have anyone who has this concession. So from that map, we began to think that it's not just asphalt, but that is in a system, and there's a surrounding that is affecting us, but in turn we are affecting the road. So we began, our roads are designed to generate competitiveness in the country, and we began to work on identifying the variables that are affecting us to conduct a risk assessment and prioritization of these corridors, because we know we are countries that don't have the resources to have a resilient, well-planned and designed infrastructure. So we trace 3 lines of action from those plans, and from this change of mindset to not be reactive and to strengthen the knowledge and understand the variables, and we began to work in conducting studies and risk assessments, because the infrastructures are, every kilometer is a different world, and to understand that has been difficult. And to develop technological tools to improve the capture of information. And third, to create awareness and train all of those who are involved in the road infrastructure. That is a very important thing and key thing. In this way, we began to work in coordination, not with a consultant who would deliver a product, but an interinstitutional work in the transportation sector. The National Road Institute and the organization that manages disaster risk in Colombia and the Afro-Colombian sector, so that we could strengthen everyone's capacity, learn, and to understand how these vulnerability studies are conducted and the risk assessments. So that is a work that's been already on for about 1.5 years. And its intent is to design a methodology for vulnerability analysis in 2 pilot corridors, because we have 17,500 kilometers, but we began to work on threats by mass movements. We did this in 2 corridors that add up to about 158 kilometers. The cost is roughly $1 million of that assessment. And with that input and that methodology, we intended to generate a methodological guide for assessment and calculation of the risk to allow us to prioritize the corridors, to implement them, and later on in other corridors with similar topographic conditions as these. This process, the key part is that synergy, the lessons learned between institutions, generates the knowledge. That is the first strategy. But apart from that, during the development of this work, what we've been realizing is that we are weak in our information. We don't have organized information, or it is of bad quality, and we created an app to create these emergencies in real time. The engineers who are on the road do this, and this allows us to process and improve the information in such a way that we can strengthen the knowledge of the risk of our road infrastructure. And the third part, which is key and fundamental, is to change that mindset of everyone who is intervening in developing this project, especially our staff who are training them and risk management, and to stop being reactive and think of prevention. So this work is led by awareness workshops in the regions, and that's on the one hand, but also to come closer to the territories and to do that same type of exercise with the local authorities. And another important component is the academia. We can't ignore the training of these professionals, so we are in these 3 lines. And another important point for us is the communities. It's key to work with the communities, and here we have designed for this year to work on the adaptation school bus, which is to go in a bus, to go to the schools, work with the children and the communities that live near the roads, so that we can create awareness on best practices and make those communities a factor of change, and so they can think what the road gives them, and to hear them on how the road is transforming them, and to give some feedback and improve. In terms of knowledge, that was the information, but we're also working on risk reduction, and we are working on the execution of projects such as bridge constructions, viaducts, variants, and tunnels. From 2011 to 2018, we've built and fixed several hundred bridges, 640 are already under contract, and 48 kilometers of tunnels are already built. The flagship project is the modernization of 2-lane roads through the program, which is the 4th generation concessions, where we are working on strengthening these works, as we said, with tunnels and viaducts and bridges. $15 million, this entrepreneurship in 4G, where we have 72 tunnels 225 kilometers of variants and 979 bridges, and all of this with benefits in time reduction, travel time, and vehicle operation expenses. And finally, in terms of management, we want this or the driving to be reduced. So we have some mechanisms which are the road administrators, which are qualified engineers who are 24 hours a day available on the road, and they are our early warning system in the case of any event. We also have the small associative companies or enterprises, which are people who live close to the roads, and they are in charge of routine maintenance of the roadways, inspection, drainage cleaning, very important to us. We also have another concept, which is depleted amount contracts, where we have a contract by resources that, as far as there is an event or an emergency, they can be addressed immediately. We also have protocols in each of the entities, and in addition to that, we have contingency plans for the rainfall season and the dry season. We also have 50 road corridors with the machinery ready to work, and we have the fourth generation program that I explained to you, where we have a policy that's novel, which is the all coverage, risk coverage policy. We want to transform this, and we are working towards that in the transportation sector. Thank you all.
Muchísimas gracias, ingeniero.
Thank you, engineer.
Damas y caballeros,
Ladies and gentlemen,
hemos tenido la oportunidad
we've had the opportunity
de compartir los elementos
to share
alrededor del
the elements and the value of critical analysis from events and the points worth highlighting in terms of resilience in regard to the value of intersectoriality in institutional strengthening, which is very important, the considerations from the role of the environment and the population, the community. So, having said this, you have 30 seconds to vote on the two questions that you have seen on the screen, or you can ask your own questions according to your consideration. 30 seconds, please.
Hello?
Oh.
I know, but everything is in Spanish. Should I proceed? May I proceed? Hello?
Yes, one second, Professor, they're voting.
Okay, buenas tardes.
Professor, 1 second, please, 1 second. Okay, se han finalizado los 30 segundos.
So the
para la
30 seconds
votación.
are up for voting,
Invitamos entonces
and we now
al
invite
Gibbs
Professor
a
Gibbs
hacer su presentación.
to give his
A continuación,
presentation,
igualmente, en su
and
momento podrán votar
also
sobre
at
los
the time you
puntos,
can vote
salientes
on
de su
the points
presentación.
that arise from his
Professor?
presentation. Professor.
The floor is yours.
Greetings from Las Antillas, donde se habla el inglés. We're speaking about sustainable design and construction of hospitals, and the subtitle of my talk is the Pan American Health Organization, Department for International Development of the UK, Smart Hospitals Project. And the definition of smart is safe plus green plus maintained. And this is the most robust project in terms of the effective enforcement of technical standards in the Caribbean that I have experienced in the past half a century. The components of the project are, first of all, the Hospital Safety Index, Green Checklist, and Baseline Assessment Tool, which is used to assess all of the facilities in a particular country in the Caribbean. The second part is the retrofitting of a few of those projects selected on the basis of their previous assessment. And the retrofitting is with prescribed standards. Those standards are carefully monitored by the Czech consultants who review independently the work of the design teams. The Hospital Safety Index, which is at the core of this project, is an assessment, a first stage assessment of the safety of the hospital, principally in the effect when affected by natural hazards. It also deals with the functional assessment or the administration of the hospital in the event of a severe natural hazard event. And you can see there the weightings given to structural assessment, 50%, the non-structural components, architectural, mechanical, electrical, which have 30% weighting, and the functional assessment, which is administration, which has 20% weighting. The work is done by multidisciplinary teams made up of structural engineers, civil engineers, mechanical and electrical engineers, hospital equipment people, as well as the hospital administration staff. And then, in addition to that, for the green aspect of the project, we have people who are experienced and knowledgeable in the field of climate change and its effect on properties. Adaptation is important because we have to adapt the health facilities not only for current climate change, but also for future climate change. The rising temperatures will affect the behavior of materials, particularly those with high coefficients of thermal expansion. And there you can see on the graph the anticipated increase in temperatures of the North Atlantic as we go forward for the next half a century. Adaptation to changes in the frequency of precipitation, which can be are of several types. We have deep foundations. We have the opportunity for ground improvement. And on a small scale, we have regular maintenance of root pruning to prevent the change of moisture content in the soils under our foundations. Adaptation to more intense precipitation is dealing with the problems of flooding. Of course, it is nice to have natural ground cover where a lot of the rainfall is accommodated by soaking into the soils. But in many of our countries, we have a lot of impervious cover, and those pose problems for stormwater drainage. Techniques used for reducing the flood potential of the properties surrounding our healthcare facilities include grass swales and French drains. One of the important aspects for structural safety of our healthcare facilities is to deal with the problem of increased hurricane activity, both the frequency of hurricanes and the intensity of those hurricanes. And for this, we are prescribing the effects of climate change, the increased wind speeds for structural design. The graph you see on the map there is based on a study carried out in 2008 by Georgia Tech, by Applied Research Associates, and by the author of this paper. And it provides specific guidance to structural engineers as to how to increase the wind speeds in our current building codes to accommodate future climate change. And this is all incorporated in the Smart Hospitals project. The design teams are required to use this information, and the check-in consultants, who are usually or who are routinely very experienced and knowledgeable professionals in the field, they ensure that the design teams do the work thoroughly and properly. Many of our hospital facilities in the islands are in coastal areas, so the marine hazards of waves, tsunamis, and storm surge affect those facilities. So adaptation to rising sea levels is an important aspect of making sure that our healthcare facilities remain operational after natural hazard events. And those phenomena of waves, tsunamis, and storm surge have all happened in the Caribbean. In fact, the Caribbean is an important area for natural hazards. We have meteorological hazards, geological hazards, and even the hazards described by the President of Colombia yesterday. Mitigation or the reduction of vulnerability is an important aspect of the Smart Hospitals project. And one of the issues which we are addressing is embodied carbon. Embodied carbon is the carbon embodied in the materials and processes involved in the construction of buildings. And reducing that amount of carbon, it makes a big contribution towards reducing climate change. For example, the cement content is an important ingredient in carbon, and the manufacture of cement is responsible for about 4% of the greenhouse gases in the world, equivalent to civil aviation. So the 3 R's are to reduce the use of materials, to reuse materials wherever possible, and to recycle materials. In fact, in the construction industry, about 80% of the steel used in construction is recycled at the moment. It's one material where the industry makes a tremendous effort to recycle old materials. And we can't achieve that with concrete, but we can achieve it, and we do, with steel. So in summary, the guidelines for the Smart Hospitals project, they focus on assisting engineers, architects, the site managers, and the contractors to create hospitals that adapt to climate change and mitigate climate change. So what we are hoping to do in 7 countries in the Commonwealth Caribbean, Belize in the northwest, Jamaica, the Windward Islands of Dominica, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and Grenada, and the South American country of Guyana, in those 7 countries, is to retrofit healthcare facilities, 50 in all, so that they are resistant to natural hazards, so that they can operate effectively during and immediately following severe natural hazard events. And in addition to that, to make a contribution to the reduction of greenhouse gases so as to mitigate climate change. In doing so, we are very focused on the amount of electricity used in the hospitals and also the amount of water used in the hospital facilities. So the project is underway. It's a 5-year project funded by the British government, and we have regular meetings to make everyone aware of where we are at. There are 4 levels of checking of all of the projects. There's a check consultant, there's a Pan American Health Organization, who is the executing agency, there's a British Development Office called DFID, Department for International Development, and also the Ministries of Health in the various countries. They all 4 entities have to sign off on all of the projects before they're actually executed on the ground. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor. El ingeniero Gibbs
Engineer
nos ha
Gibbs
compartido el
will
tema del
or
ajuste normativo
has shared with us
en cuanto
the
a
standard
localización, elementos
retrofitting
estructurales y
according to the
funcionales
non-structural,
que
structure, and
lleven a la
non-functional that
adaptación
will lead
y la
us to the
mitigación para el
adaptation and
desarrollo
mitigation
hospitales
to
verdes,
develop
seguros e inteligentes
green,
en el Caribe.
intelligent, or smart
Ustedes van a
and
disponer
green
en este
hospitals in the
momento
Caribbean. So
de 30
right
segundos
now you
para
will have
votar
30
sobre las
seconds to
preguntas
vote
que están
around the questions
expuestos a nombre
to
del
the ones that are
ingeniero
exhibited
Gibbs
here and
para
who were
poder
proposed by
conformar
Engineer
posteriormente
Gibbs so
preguntas y
that later we are able to
Por
have
favor,
a
señores,
Q&A
con sus
session.
teléfonos,
So please, all of
procedan a la
you
votación.
with your phones, vote. Please vote. Okay.
Pueden formular nuevas preguntas.
And you can also formulate new questions if you want.
Muchas gracias. Procede entonces.
Thank you very much. Now I want to invite Carlos Valdez, General Director of the National Prevention Center of Mexico, for his presentation. Thank you very much. Thank you. Good afternoon. I would like to talk today about the experience after 32 years of building, resilience building, according to the earthquakes in 1985 and what we lived last year regarding the continuity of critical services. My presentation will be in English. I will speak in Spanish, and here we also have one person helping us with sign language. So which are the public tools that countries need in terms of policies in order to face risks with a broad spectrum, and which of them are the most effective and the best practices so that they could be also replicated? The first thing we would say is that Mexico has a general law of civil protection, which must be applied and must be at a federal, state, and municipal level. That means being close to the people. We must have tools to strengthen this organization, and we must also foster or encourage the complete integration of the risk understanding. We must talk about the three characteristics. Our country has 32 states, 32 federal states, and 31 of them have adopted civil protection. There are still 7 to publish them, but this will enable us because we are required, and there's a law that we must have this participation. There are financial instruments or tools as well. Here we have an example of the damages that were recorded in the Oaxaca and Chiapas zone in September 2017, and that through a disaster fund that has 421 million pesos and a preventive fund which has 17 million pesos, dollars, and through, in this case, credit cards that were handed into people, mainly to women, we were able to rebuild, and we will see it in March 2018. We had enabled structure. There is also a catastrophic fund which was used to also assist directly this emergency. And here we see the armed forces work. This is a school in Cuchitan, and we can see they're rebuilding, and again in 2018. And here there's another school which is called Escuela Mexico, Mexico School. We must also carry on drills. We had 2 earthquakes in less than 12 days. One 8.2 magnitude and 10 minutes before midnight. We also had another one of 7.1 magnitude after 1 p.m. And during the second one in September 19, we had already had a general drill, and then 2 hours after that we had an earthquake. So we had the chance to use a seismic alert, which works for the first earthquake, which gave us 85 seconds of anticipation in Mexico, but the second one, due to its closeness, we did not have an alert, and after 10 seconds, the alert went off. Mexico has 68 indigenous national languages. 7.3 Mexicans talk one of these languages, and as we can see in this infographic, it's written in Xochitl Chiapas, so we must communicate information in the language of the people. Here we have an image where we are able to see. Here we have. No. This is an exercise that we must all do because we must also know how it feels to be on the other side when we speak a different language. Other important element is that the maximum authority of the country participates. As you can see on the left, we see President Enrique Peña Nieto, and we also see the governor of the Mexican Estado de Mexico, and we also see the municipality director of Huitzipan, and the three of them are working together to face this emergency. If we do not have our maximum authorities working, the importance really disappears, and when they work hand in hand and talking with the people, we are able to assist them during the emergency. We must also understand that we have to be prepared to more phenomena. Here we have fires, massive events. We also have active volcanoes, and we also have earthquakes. So there's a great amount of phenomena to which we are exposed to. Now, technology-wise and also regarding innovation allows the country to have skills and tools that are more than just funding. Everybody has power stations, but something that we do not take into account are the amount of diesel that they have. And as in the case of our organization, which had 10% of diesel, and 10% of diesel gives us more than just an hour of activity. So there's are elements, but people said, but you shouldn't be concerned because you can have the truck just supplied for you, but then they told us that the diesel will be the currency exchange in the future. We know that with just a cell phone, we're able to communicate ourselves in a very speed way, but probably it will be one of the elements that can be lost during an event. Technology, as you can see here, NASA just launched the best satellite for climate that can exist, but how can we transform that information directly to the people or convey information? Yesterday we had, the pigeon who had a camera and could take the pictures. But now we have to get adapted and adapt ourselves or adapt technology so it can reach everyone. The communities, which is our greatest challenge, are the most marginal ones. And so how to reach them? Here we're doing it with a prevention caravan. And here we are in Oaxaca, and we're talking with the people in the community. And here one of the most important parts are the children, and specifically in this region in Xochitlán, Puebla, where we have to get them involved. This is what occurred in less than a month with Harvey. Here is then the Hurricane Kathy in the Gulf, and then this one in Oaxaca, Pilar, and then we also had an 8.2 earthquake and a 7.1 earthquake. So these are the disasters or the threats that we face, and we have an atlas here, which is very important. I ask you to look at your image at the right at an exposure of 100 kilometers. We saw 28 million more people. We felt that earthquake very strongly. In this zone, we had 8 million houses, 5,713 health care centers, and 54,000 schools. Numbers are very important here because there was a great concern because close to 18,000 households had some time of damage in the city of Mexico. But when we see it in a population of 8 million, we have to know what that represents. We are talking about all this percentage, but it's not acceptable that there's a damage in a household or victims due to this earthquake. Here is Oaxaca. We had 4.2 million people affected, 1,300 health centers, and 12,000 schools. We transformed this information. This is specific for landslides, where we've identified in this municipality 25 people having a high risk and 20,000 in also medium and high level risks. We transformed this information and conveyed it so people could receive it, and this information exists when all the construction codes were created. We saw first in 1985, after the earthquake in 1985, and all the houses that were built before, and which required sometimes of modification, and people has also to know what to do in these cases. And as we can see, all the buildings that were damaged were taken into account in broadening of this seismic movement. As people, we need to know what these tools are, what they mean. As we can see, we have a building built at the end of the 60s, which is in well, but after the earthquake, it lost the first floor. So not everything that looks good is always good. So the amount of elements of the federal government who participated in the support, not only for the earthquake of September 7, there are millions of people. The healthcare area worked and participated, more than 54,198 people, and that talks about the coordination. It is a coordination between all. What should we do? We should detect the risks, define exactly the places where we are, and how can we get protected? We have to decide, to make decisions. Should I stay? Should I leave? These were the most common questions of the people when they heard the seismic alert. Sometimes they can say, well, during the first earthquake, it went well, but during the second, it didn't. So they have to really state or declare where they should be, and maybe do more drills. It will be, in this case, we should make a drill to go out and see how Argentina is doing in the World Cup, but we should stay here. So all those who are less than 30 years old did not understand what the earthquakes were. So they really state a very good example, because the youngsters wanted to give support, and this means that these disasters and natural disasters as earthquakes always get the best of the people, and we saw that with example in Guatemala. Hopefully we shouldn't face these disasters, or in order to get the best of the countries that are participating here. And with this, I close my presentation, and I thank my sign language interpreter. If you could say, for example, how to say disaster in sign language. Can we repeat it, all of you? How do we say disaster in sign language? And applaud. Okay, and how do we say applause?
Muchas gracias, Dr. Valdés.
Thank you, Dr. Valdés. This was a great opportunity to congratulate you with the game this morning against Mexico. It really showed us the relationship with the technology, but applied with human and a real also application. So I invite now our distinguished minister from Ecuador for your presentation.
Perdona, ministra. 30 segundos.
Excuse me, Minister. We have 30 more seconds for you to vote, which starts right now. Remind you that you could also make your own questions.
Ministro, el podio es suyo. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Dr. Watson, and good afternoon to all of you. It is my pleasure to be here in this plenary session. Thank you to Pau for this invitation. Undoubtedly, we've repeated several words within the context of these plenary sessions, which has to do with the interinstitutional articulation and the need to review in a permanent way the cycle of public policy. It also has to do with the corresponsibility of or between the governments and the different levels of the governments and citizens. Ecuador undoubtedly is a country that has 4 main regions, which are the Log-Lid region and the Caribbean, and these regions have aspects which affect or are affected by hazardous events with different magnitude, mainly which has to do with volcanoes, landslides, earthquakes, droughts, fires, and floodings. Floodings are the most popular, let's say, in our country, specifically in the coastal zone and the Amazon region. But along these years or throughout the years, it has been one of the events that have mostly affected Ecuador, and the increase of the losses that this means has also been exponential during the past years. These floodings have also occurred due to the presence of rainfall during the winter season, not only because of the Niño phenomena, but due to the recurrency, which comes also together with other aspects that we aren't able to review from the public policy standpoint. One of the points is the inadequate planning of our cities, the lack of compliances with the territorial or the land use planning, which makes that many of our zones become vulnerable due to this phenomena. There is a legal framework which has to do with the Constitution of the Republic of Ecuador, which was enacted in the year 2008, where we established in a comprehensive way the risk management policy and the creation of the entity and some causes of natural, where this relationship of human beings with nature has to do in the preservation and the comprehensive respect and the regeneration of its vital cycles and everything that has to do with this structure. We also have, for example, the National Secretariat of Water, which is an entity created also in our Constitution with the Hydric Resources Law, and with which we've worked in the Water National Plan, which enables us or enables the objectives that both at a central level and at different levels in the government can be stated in this scenario, but also allows us to think in state-of-the-art projects that help us to develop the productive matrix of the country. Another aspect has to do with the National Development Plan, both in years 2003, 2017, and 2017 till 2021, where the water topic, as well as the planning and aspects that have to do with risk management, are involved. Which are then the type, or let's say the systems to reduce floodings? Well, the most dangerous ones mainly are in the hydrographic basins in the coast, the province of the Manabí, Guayas, El Oro, and Esmeraldas rivers. These provinces, throughout the years, have been affected due to the rainy seasons, which have caused losses not only of infrastructure, but also of human lives and agricultural areas. As we've said before, one of the ways of preventing, or the preventive ways for us, is to discover and regarding the knowledge concept is to get to know the characteristics of the threat. And in the case of floodings, we have two types of them. First, the flooding of rivers and also
en este contexto.
which are the most frequent ones in this context. The main factors for these floodings to occur are two. First, inadequate agricultural practices during the crop cycle by accelerating erosion processes, which makes this to be deposited in the riverbeds and causing also a decrease in the transportation. We also have deforestation. We see how in many zones the increase of population, specifically in rural areas, exceeds the limit of the agricultural border, destroying the forests and modifying the different ecosystems. Other factors that we can mention and that add to this climate variability and also impact floodings have to do with the lack of compliance of the land use planning, the use of soil and land, which really makes some communities to be more exposed and which are now highly vulnerable.
We've also detailed a historical record of what it's meant in Ecuador to have the presence of the phenomenon of El Niño. Between 1972 and 1973, the provinces that were most affected were Guayas, Esmeralda, and Los Ríos. This period of impact was almost one calendar year, with approximately 600 people who were affected and reaching losses accounted for $450 million. Within that context, there was a direct impact of 10 months. Between 1982 and 1983, the recurrence in those same towns existed again. It occurred again. And it happened between 92, November 93, August 92, November 93, and the number of people affected increased in more than 1,000 people, with an influence of $650 million. So there's 15% of the surface of the territory which is affected. Between 1997 and 1998, in addition to the extension, there was an intensity higher than the previous years. The map already locates the critical areas where there are historical records, including especially the lower basin of Guayas River, because these affected areas have been growing gradually with time, and it is what you can see here on this map. The provinces that were most affected are the same ones in this case, including 3 provinces in the Ecuadorian Sea area, including Chimborazo, Suárez, and Pañar. The period was between October 1997 and June 1998, reaching a level of people affected of 93,500 and losses in the amount of $2 billion. It hasn't been only El Niño phenomenon that has brought these problems throughout the years, but also in the years 2008 and 2012, surpassing the normal historical ranges of rainfall and affecting several areas in the country. In 2018, 222,000 hectares were flooded, while in 2012, it was 184,000 hectares. While in 2012 there was a reduction, it doesn't mean that there is no larger influence in the agricultural and livestock areas of our country. The technological tools existing in 2012 allowed us to identify areas vulnerable to floods that occurred because of waterlogging and river spills. And in Ecuador, we were able to improve the answer in the territory by the institutions, government institutions, and we invested on projects for flood control in order to increase the areas affected, and the Secretariat has been working jointly with the community in contingency plans and immediate response in the face of a flood. The projects you can see are located in different areas, which are in the Chone River and Volubulu River in Cañar and Guayas, and in the province of Cañar and Naranjal in the province of Guayas. The projects are about execution of mega works, but they're also about capturing regulation and driving of water for flood control. And the implementation of these projects approximately has benefited 263,000 inhabitants in an investment of about $450 million and with 110 protected hectares. As you can see on the screen, you can have the details of the projects, how much has been invested, and how many people have benefited from this, from each one. And in 2017, the colleagues called it the Niño phenomenon in the coast, and it brought several floods for Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru. However, the impact on Ecuador was minimized by the strategic location of these flood control projects. In the reports that we have, it was evident that the amount of affected communities were much less than in the previous rainfall seasons. And between 2017 and 2018, the information gives us that there has been a considerable reduction of impact, with 184,000 hectares affected by El Niño phenomenon in 2012 and 2017. The amount of hectares affected was then 18,000. It's a considerable reduction. Our time is up, Minister, so yes, I'd like to close with the following. For us, this implementation of the projects arises from a real impact, but also the implementation of public policy, which has to do with the guarantee of the rights of citizens, and it has to do with conceiving a good lifestyle, which we have been promoting. In this case, in 2018, there are still several projects underway, especially in the flood system of the lower Guayas River Basin. There is an approximate number of 263,828 beneficiaries. But what we do know clearly, and you will agree with me, is that investing on prevention and reduction and mitigation of risk is far cheaper, as our planning secretariat has stated from a study from 2012, where the investment of $1 or each dollar invested in the country means $9 of savings. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias, señora ministra. Creo que nos ha agregado un nuevo aspecto.
Thank you, Minister, and we've added a new aspect to this topic, and I'd like to invite you all in the next 30 seconds to vote accordingly.
Muchas gracias por su votación.
Thank you for your vote. Ladies and gentlemen, we've had the opportunity to see different venues where we have events where, in a way, from the social origin, infrastructure, and population, they affect what we've been discussing, which is the ability or the capacity of resilience and security and safety of our networks, sanitary, infrastructure, and community. The important thing is that we've also identified experiences where the construction of resilience measures and safety allows to have a better response in the face of multiple risk scenarios that our countries have within their climate vulnerability, soils, and historical population practices. As Professor Gibbs has said, mitigation is fundamental, and also the importance of the political will has been pointed out, and the relevance, which is not less important, of the participation of the community within the understanding of the magnitude and severity of disasters and emergencies, but also their responsiveness thereto. There are multiple elements that we have to consider that will allow our countries to come closer to the necessary answers to have an actual network of services, housing, social networks that are resilient in the case of the sanitary infrastructure, that is green and smart. Therefore, I want to invite you to read the questions on your screen. Each participant has the option to answer the most voted questions, the two highest voted questions, and you will have about 3 minutes to answer them. In the event that only one question is answered, in that time frame, we will give that time as assigned for the answer process. The questions are displayed on the screen, and you can also see them on your mobile phones. I'm going to ask and hand over the microphone to the Minister for the corresponding questions. The question is how the community is being prepared in terms of floods in...
Bueno, razones importantes las que vimos acá en esta exposición que se hace desde la ciudad de Cartagena. La primera que ella es el tema de la construcción de las ciudades, la planificación de las mismas, cómo desde el Estado se deben hacer esfuerzos por hacer las advertencias necesarias para que las personas no habiten zonas de riesgo, es decir, en las riberas de los ríos, cerca a zonas donde se puedan presentar inundaciones. Ese es uno de los puntos básicos que vimos en los minutos pasados. Y el otro tiene que ver con el aspecto de las comunicaciones, la tecnología al servicio de los pobladores.
Claro que sí, Juan Carlos. El tema del ordenamiento del territorio, los planes de ordenamiento territorial aplicado para el caso de Colombia y la importancia de construir una cultura de gestión del riesgo de desastres. Esta cultura la construimos desde nuestra casa, teniendo el plan familiar de emergencia, nuestro maletín de emergencia, que son básicamente todas las herramientas de reducción del riesgo de desastres, porque estar mejor preparados es la mejor opción ante un evento natural que pueda generar cualquier tipo de emergencia.
Bueno, y nosotros tenemos una cita con los televidentes de Canal Institucional, hoy a las 9:30 de la noche, informativo con todos los detalles de lo que está pasando aquí en Cartagena.
Claro que sí, a las 9:30 los esperamos nuevamente aquí en la 6ª plataforma regional para la reducción del riesgo de desastres de las Américas desde la heroica Cartagena de Indias.